Welcome back to Voice of Super, ASFA's podcast for the superannuation sector by the superannuation sector. We are live from the ASFA Conference 2025, where the vibe, the energy has been amazing, the discussions have been phenomenal, the networking has been absolutely unparalleled, and it has been a really wonderful experience. Part of what has made it so great has been the incredible array of speakers. One speaker who is featuring at our conference is Simon Kuestenmacher, and he is the co-founder and director of the Demographics Group with Bernard Salt, who many people will know. You are here to talk about demography is so fascinating, Simon, which is why we've invited you onto Voice of Super. Great to have you.
That's great to be on.
And what we're going to be talking about today is the big question for superannuation, which is millennials. How are they going to retire? Because these are our future superannuants. Let's first of all just categorise what actually is a millennial.
Yeah, well, there are different ways of categorizing each generation. Quite in the most simplistic terms that nobody can fight over, millennials are the kids of the baby boomers. So these are more or less the people that are being born in the 80s and 90s. According to the most common definition that we use, these are people born from 82 to 99. Another common definition is from 81 to 96, but it doesn't really matter so much. It is the important thing, these are the kids of the baby boomers, and they have the important demographic title of being the largest generation in Australia ever. Because we not only are the kids of a big generation, but we also amped them up through migration for 2 decades now. So they are a really big bunch of people that right now are in the midst of their working life. They make families right now as well, but eventually they will retire. And so we see an even bigger cohort retire with the millennials in, starting from maybe 20 years or so from now, than the baby boomer cohort right now.
Yeah, and you also call them the struggling generation. Why is that?
Well, at the very least, they are perceiving themselves as the struggling generation because they are the first cohort in Australia that is, statistically speaking, doing less well than their parents are. And that has a couple of psychological impacts on this cohort. You feel that maybe the system isn't working for you. Maybe you're a bit tougher than previous generations in criticizing the system because you feel, well, you grew up in a nice baby boomer household, so you know what it's like to own a big house. And you compare yourself with your parents at the same time. Your parents at 30 already had you and your sibling, and you are still living in a shared house. And your parents had a house at this point, and so forth. And so you go, why isn't it working for me? Because I did go to university.
They're more educated than ever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is much higher than previous generations, is the share of people with a university degree. But all the while, we created, of course, for this generation, what we would call degree inflation. That a university degree, back in the days, for the grandparents, maybe 10% of them went to university. Now, as of this year, we'll be sending 55% of our people, of our year 12s to university. And for the millennials, it's something in the 40s, of course, that actually have a uni degree.
And we're seeing a conflation of a number of really large economic trends which are working against their favour. So there is
Yes.
house prices, lack of housing availability, wage stagnation effectively, certainly not keeping up with inflation. So I think that we broadly know, what the effect of that is going to be, but the numbers are pretty stark. In fact, if we're thinking about retirement, what sort of percentage of millennials is going to retire without owning a house?
Well, that is the $1 million or probably more dollars than that question at this point in time. We do see that the home ownership rate of millennials is much below the home ownership rate of previous generations at that point in time. From a superannuation perspective, we of course don't care whether a millennial is a homeowner right now. We want to make sure that the day that they are entering the payout phase of superannuation, that they have a house or a home then. That's the important thing. And we don't know how this will play out because the intergenerational wealth transfer from the baby boomers to the millennials, that is still at least a decade out. And then we will.
So we're not sure.
We're not sure.
So someone who is 33 now renting, that's not necessarily predicted that they're going to be renting when they're 43 because there could be some wealth transfer
So we do know
at that point in time.
the share of the 33-year-olds that will go into 43-year-olds, into 53-year-olds, 63-year-olds, the homeownership rate will go up rather than down. So that makes sense. And then you just go, but by how much will it go up? That depends on how much money they have or how expensive housing is. I do not predict housing to get any cheaper. So we go, okay, how much money do they get? Well, they earn their wage, that's fine. But there is this wildcard of how much wealth will they inherit from their baby boomer parents. And if I'm 33, my parent is in their mid-60s. So they easily got another 20, 25 years to live. So most people will inherit wealth in their late 50s to early 60s because traditionally speaking, we tend to hand over most wealth when the last parent dies. And that's mom, because mom is 4 years younger than dad, has 4 years longer life expectancy on top of that. So we can map it out rather precisely when the wealth transfer will occur, and it will speed up year after year from now on. It will reach a crescendo in 2041, that is peak baby boomer women deaths, if you will, or we call it peak wealth transfer to keep it a bit more palatable from a language perspective.
Peak mum dies.
Yes, 2041.
Okay, let's not call it that. That's bad marketing. Okay.
Yeah, and so we then know that the vast majority, when we talk, because we talk so much about this wealth transfer, how much will it be? It's like, we don't know, because we are not sure through how much wealth the baby boomers will burn throughout their retirement. That's a massive wild card. We know that they spent more in retirement than previous generations. They're more likely to, they're more trigger happy at the cash register, so to speak. But we can't take it for granted that they will hand down the family home as they die, because they want to die in the family home. That's the real baby boomer Australian dream, is to be carried out of the family home. They're not downsizers at scale at all, baby boomers. I guess that is downsizing into the box if you get carried out
Simon.
of the home.
All right, let's not get too graphic here. Thank you.
But so with this home transfer that will occur eventually, we go, well, who's inheriting the wealth? Well, it's I think 2.4 kids the baby boomers have, and so they will either sell the family house as is to a cashed-up buyer, but more likely than not, we will bulldoze the brick veneer that they inherit, and we'll put 2, 3, 28 townhouses on top.
Yeah.
Whatever you can squeeze in, and this wealth can get split between the three or two or three kids, and that money most likely will end up in one way or another in the property market, because Australians, as soon as they get wealth, they tend to either pay off their mortgage or buy an investment property. And so we are not sure just how big that thing is. Also, you want to remember what kind of property. Let's say you are a renter in your late 50s. You kicked your kids out by this stage, and you inherit money. You can buy the 2-bedroom retirement apartment or house somewhere. And just by how much this will change, we don't know. So there's a lot of uncertainty in there, which of course you don't want to hear if you manage a fund, because what you really want is as much certainty as possible when you look decades ahead.
Yeah. Is it fair to say, though, that the working assumption that superannuation has predominantly built on is that most people will own their home in retirement? Will it still be the case that most people will own their home in retirement?
Well, the majority will, but it will probably be a much lower share than we expected when we first drew up superannuation in the early 90s or whenever. So that is difficult. And then, of course, you could argue, no problem, let's just drive up the home ownership rate. Let's just ensure that we put more Australians into their home. Let's drive down house prices to enable this. And that's where my demographic forecasts say this won't happen. I would predict that homes are not getting any cheaper, mostly because there are too many parties in the system, stakeholders in the system, that want housing to be more expensive rather than less expensive. And fighting against this wave, I don't see any political or any government in our near-term future, meaning over the 6-7 next elections, that is willing to do this. In 6-7 elections, Australian politics, demographics suggest, will change quite dramatically. But if you only look 18, 21 years ahead, housing will be expensive by choice.
Okay, so let's just talk more broadly about the tax system and about today's millennials and the tax burden that they are carrying as compared with what their parents did in order to support retirees, and how that fits in with our broader picture of how those younger cohort are going to retire, because they're effectively paying a lot more tax.
That's right. So we are charging young person more money to pay for the retiree cohort than we asked the previous cohort to do, simply because we now have a much bigger cohort in retirement, because we live longer. And these are positive developments. You first and foremost must remember this. The idea that we live longer lives is an absolute godsend. This is great stuff. And so then you go, well, okay, we tax you more money because somewhere this money must come from. And tax, if you are the federal government, you go, well, what kind of taxes can you pull? And we pull most of our tax from income tax. About 50% or so is income tax each budget. If you count super taxes and so forth, you can drive this number up to 60 or 70%, depending on how you push those numbers. But it means we rely heavily on income tax. And then you go, boy, that's tough. Because then if we need more money to pay for a bigger, older population, we just need to keep income tax go up and up and up, because that's our most important tax vehicle. And this goes well for so long as the biggest tax-paying cohort says it's a good deal for us.
Yeah.
And millennials might not think this for all the time.
All the time. Let's talk a little bit about the scenario in which a majority of Australians still own their own home, but a significant minority don't when they retire. Does that mean that we need to start rethinking retirement itself?
It does. It does, because many people, we're talking about low-income earners who might have paid into the superannuation system for well over 4 decades, but they did so on a very low wage. They will not have enough money in the system to retire at, let's call it 66, 67, 68, and then live for another 25 years, which they might well do if they're young at the moment. And you go, well, that means we actually need to account for more age pension payouts than we previously thought we might have to.
Okay, so are you saying that the age? Are you talking about changing age?
Well, so what kind of levers do you have as a system? One of the levers is to make sure that you work a bit longer. That means you put a bit more money in the system and you put much less out, because you draw you have less years where you pull it out. That is almost certain to happen. But here it is less pressing to pull this than in a system like Germany, where there is one collective bucket of retirement savings, and where the demographic profile is much less favorable compared to Australia. So their pension ages must rise much faster than they will need to rise here.
Right, interesting. But I think that also in Australia, I think that the changing nature of retirement means that, it's no longer a cliff, right? It's not like you work 5 days a week one day and then... No. So there are many things that can actually change within the retirement system itself. So, we talk about not having two accounts, actually moving that into one account is one thing which is very favourable and seems to make a lot of sense to a lot of people. Changing that sort of a setting to making it easier for people to continue to work longer, and which also improves their life expectancy and improves their enjoyment of life. We actually as well.
There's endless research that says you should work from a mental health perspective for as long as possible. It's really good for your mental health. But of course, at some stage in your life, you will want to be in control of how much you work. If you can afford to, feel free to retire completely. But many people will want to they'll see their whatever their super payout is each month as their baseline, and say, I still do a bit on the side to amp up my my earnings a bit. And we're seeing this. We already see this, that baby boomers in retirement now, that they're shifting the way that they retire. So we've seen the end of Gold Watch retirement, Gold Watch on a Friday, and then golf course until you drop. That's not the case anymore. We see people sliding into retirement. They go down to 4 days, 3 days working weeks. Maybe they start taking really long holidays in the middle of the year to finally go on that Rhine River cruise. But ultimately, this is a result of more people having knowledge-type jobs. Because it is quite easy to work into your 60s, into your 70s if you are an accountant, if you have some sort of desk job. If you're a bricklayer, good luck working into your 60s. Your back just doesn't hold up as long to do this. So we see within the workforce there are certain different options that are open to some people and not to others.
We've talked a little about the millennials as a broad group, but also what's interesting is the divergence of retirements and of wealth outcomes in Australia as we see a more polarised society. Tell us what you're seeing about and what you predict will be the future of the middle class.
Yeah, so if we look at Australia, maybe in the 60s, Australia did resemble quite closely a bell curve, where sure, rich people, poor people, they did exist, but overall most Australians fell into this egalitarian middle-class wonderland, one-size-fits-all consumer cohort. By now we transitioned into a society that much more closely resembles the letter U, where we have a big cohort on the top, we don't, who earn plenty of money, who have plenty of savings, we don't worry about them, they're fine. The middle class keeps shrinking, but they're ultimately also fine, because many members of the middle class happen to be tradies who, because of a tradie shortage, did receive higher wages than expected, so they'll be fine. But you have this big cohort of low-income earners, who are also the people, of course, who are less likely to be homeowners. And so this cohort grows and grows and grows, and they will more and more likely to be a bigger share of the retirement cohort each year. So then you go, well, what do we do with those folks? And of course you could say, well, on an individual level, try to buy a small property at some point. But how do you do this on a low income? It doesn't add up. So that means you will need to provide housing for them in some way or another. That is either the rental system, but rents tend to go up and up and up. And so that means the state must somehow supplement that.
Is this U-shaped demographic curve, are we seeing this in comparable economies as well? Is this everywhere?
Our letter U is much less severe than the letter U in, let's say, Brazil or the US or South Africa. These are extreme cases. But we are intensifying the U shape rather than propping up the middle class. Or pushing more people of the lower income back into the middle class. Something like this is not taking place at the moment. So we are moving in the wrong direction rather than the right direction. The biggest lever that we would, of course, have here to counteract this trend would be lowering house prices. I think that it would be in the long term extremely desirable to slow house price growth to an absolute stagnation of house price levels, so that over 2, 3, 4 decades, wages can catch up and make housing significantly more affordable. But the system, as I mentioned before, there are too many players in the system that like high house prices. We think about banks. They do mostly mortgages in Australia. Mortgages are bigger and longer. That's cool for them. The government wants it because they know that 3/4 of the homeowners have a house. And as John Howard famously quipped, he never met a voter that complained about his house becoming more expensive. So what's there? When do we actually push this over? And it would need to take a political party of immense will to think this long term, because in the short term, just by even toying with the idea of less expensive housing, the other party just needs to shut up, and then they will be voted in, as we've seen with Bill Shorten's election last. And so if I then go to do a bit of demographic maths with election data, I would forecast that the Labour and Liberal parties in Australia will probably be in power for 6 to 7 elections. After this, which is 18 to 21 years or so, we see a switch to a probably unknown political entity putting the leadership in place. This sounds like a crazy forecast because these are established parties in Australia, but we've seen this all over Europe, that established parties die. The death of the major parties in Australia occurs much slower because our voting system favors the center. We have compulsory voting. We know in a system where compulsory voting is the case, over 90% of us vote. That means the middle is always strengthened. If we were to have the US system, we'd lose 30% of voters and would mostly lose Labour and Liberal voters in the center. The fringe on the left and right tends to be motivated anyways. So that would slow down. Also, we have preferential voting, where even if I vote for some minor fringe party, ultimately it ends up in Labour or Liberal's hands, my vote. And so far, that worked out. But if you look at 1987 election, 2% of us voted for third parties. At the last election, a third of us voted for third parties.
So what does that then mean for actual, if we just to bring it back to retirement policy, if we look at, you talked earlier about the German example, where we have a pension system which is in really serious trouble, yet the far-right party over there, the AfD, is proposing an incredible almost
they're very
fantastical.
It is fantastical. It is not to be taken serious at all.
Tell us about it, though.
The AfD in Germany says, because now the big discussion is that the pension aid needs to be lifted and lifted and lifted in Germany. The AfD says we're not doing this. Pension age stays the same. Of course, if you have a big voting cohort that is old, it's very attractive. And you also say we fix the pension at 70% of your last income.
Right. So defined benefit.
Yeah, and that can't possibly work. Like, there's no math scenario where this works.
But as we are seeing, you know, in Germany and in other European countries, certainly far right, far left, certainly on the rise, which have a less centrist and less realistic, let's say, approach to economics.
Yeah.
Where do we end up? I mean,
it leaves a German government, for example, with wonderful choices. The first one is you do the economically prudent thing and you limit pension payouts. In this system, you open the floodgates for the AfD vote, because the old people go, well, maybe I'm not really in line with all of their policies, but man, I want my pension payout. So you open the AfDs in that scenario. Maybe you say, well, we need to keep the AfD at bay, and we therefore keep pension payouts yourself high and so forth. And then you drive the economy against the wall. And so what do you do? It's an absolute wicked position to find yourself in as a government.
And are you saying that Australia is not there yet?
We're not there
because of, and will we ever get? I mean, the very nature of our voting system actually makes it much more difficult for those parties to actually get in. But are you saying that there is a point where the tipping point of third party or non-major parties actually?
So the new party that I would imagine to emerge in the next 6, 7, 8 elections there would be a centrist party. It would not be a political fringe, because the political fringe is too far apart. Yeah. So there must be some sort of new central thing that emerges, and we've seen already, though, and that's my own counter argument is that if you look at the crazy protest marches that we've seen, quite often you have people from the far right and the far left in the same march. So it's the idea that we probably need to rethink our idea of politics into just left and right spectrum. So we need to find a new analogy to actually talk about policies. So the idea is there is a resetting of the system in place, slowly in the background. And at the moment we are still a bit confused by what's actually going on.
So fascinating, Simon. I think that we're going to have to wrap it up there, and we've drifted far from superannuation policy, but I think that it's also relevant. All of these demographic changes and the implications for politics and policy are just so important to our superannuation sector. So it's been fantastic to speak with you. Thank you for joining us on Voice of Super.
Absolute pleasure.
And of course, you can subscribe to Voice of Super and not miss a single episode. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'm Madeleine Morris. See you next time.